Alrighty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach here in Seattle, Washington, serving online information entrepreneurs throughout the US and the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am super excited to welcome a fellow attorney here today. Welcome to Allison Williams.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. I'm excited to be here with you.
I'm super excited to have you. You have a really interesting story, and I just really love the entrepreneurial side of your story and your journey, and I'm excited to dig into that today. For those of you that don't know Allison Williams, Allison is the owner of not one, but two successful companies. She is the founder of Williams Law Group, a full-service family law firm where she is a fellow of the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, is certified by the New Jersey Supreme Court as matrimonial law attorney, and is certified by National Board of Trial Advocacy in family law. After taking Williams Law Group from startup to a multi-million-dollar business in 3.5 years, she created a second business, Law Firm Mentor, where she and her team provide business coaching services for solo and small law firm attorneys, helping them grow their revenues, crush chaos in business, and make more money. This business was born out of her success in business, including winning the Law Firm 500 Award, ranking 14th of the fastest growing law firms in the nation, being named a Stevie Award finalist for Female Entrepreneur of the Year in 2017 and in 2018, being voted as NJ Biz's, so New Jersey Business Top 50 Women in Business, and designated one of the top 25 leading women entrepreneurs and business owners. The motto of Law Firm Mentor is never stop growing. An international speaker in the field of child abuse and neglect evidence and trial practice, Ms. Williams has appeared on the Katie Couric Show and has published articles in the Huffington Post addressing issues of child maltreatment. Since 2018, she has been selected among her peers as one of the top 100 super lawyers in New Jersey, one of the top 50 women super lawyers in New Jersey, and has been voted by her clients as one of New Jersey's best lawyers for families. Quite the intro. It's multiple mouthfuls, Allison. It's so good to have you here. There's obviously a lot that we can learn from you today. So I would love to know about, I always love hearing about people's roots and their start into the entrepreneur path. You want to tell us a little bit about the early part of your, we'll just call it your legal journey.
Sure. I would love to say that I went to law school because I wanted to change the world and be an agent for the good in life. But honestly, I went because I wanted power and money. That was
Mm.
the that was where I was back then. And fell into doing family law because I got an internship after my first year of law school working for a judge, and it was in family law. I got placed into the family part, and so next thing you know, my pathway just continued to intersect with family law. So became a family law attorney very quickly. Got my roots in family law, and happened to have a client walk into our office one day. I was the youngest associate in the family law department, so I was tasked with doing the work that nobody else wanted to do. And this woman was accused of child maltreatment, and through the process of having to defend her, I got to understand what she allegedly did wrong. And she just had a lot of tragic life circumstances. Husband committed
Mm.
suicide, daughter found him, son is very autistic and had a lot of issues. She became an alcoholic, one thing after another after another. And the state was tasked with not just protecting her children, but remediating her issues so that she could safely parent. And I found that the system was horribly toxic and flawed. And they
Yeah.
did not offer her help. They piled on a laundry list of things for her to do, not with an idea of helping her, but with an idea of having her fail so they could take her children and have them adopted by someone else. And it really became my life's work to defeat that system. I found it to be deplorable. I found it to be harmful to families. And I also found that it didn't really honor the value that I have, which is that people are entitled to redemption, and people can make mistakes and still overcome those mistakes if they are committed to improving and evolving themselves as people. And so that's kind of always been the thread that's run through my ethos. Became a business owner very quickly. My business ran me over. Being good at law has nothing to do with being good in business, nothing at all. And I didn't know that. So I did a lot of lawyering and thought I'll just do my lawyering under my own LLC instead of someone else's, and worked harder and harder and harder. And after a series of 90-hour work weeks, I fell asleep driving and almost hit a guardrail. And that was kind of my aha moment that working harder is not working. I said, this stuff is for the birds. I didn't say stuff, but this is a PG show. And decided I would sell myself to the highest bidder, and got a job offer as a partner at a large law firm. And on my way there, I pulled over on the side of the road and I said, what am I doing? I put myself through all of this to start a business. Why am I going to throw it away now? There's got to be a way to make this work. And started working with business coaches. Very quickly used my natural instinct of systematizing everything and added it to what I learned in not only business coaching, but most importantly, mindset coaching. And ultimately was able to very quickly scale my business. Like I said, multiple seven figures in 3.5 years. And after a while, I was bored. I had grown myself out of a job in my law firm. So I had a nice salary and I had a comfortable existence, but I didn't have the challenge of solving problems every day, which is really why I became a lawyer. So I launched Law Firm Mentor in January of 2018. It is the reason why I decided to go into coaching, that I wanted to help lawyers that were very much like me. They were committed to helping their clients. They wanted to have a good experience for clients, but they also wanted more for themselves. And they didn't know that those two things could coexist. They always thought they had to be the sacrificial lamb. And I didn't want that for me. And I didn't want that for my fellow attorneys. And so launched Law Firm Mentor. We're now a multiple seven-figure company in also 3 years. And now I run both of them in about 30 hours a week because I systematize everything. And that's what I'm committed to. I'm committed to crushing chaos in business and making more money. So every time something goes wrong, I think, how can I crush the chaos in this? How can I systematize this into me not needing to be necessary for this role? And I have surrounded myself with some amazing people that help me to do that. And we give our clients great service all across the country. We have clients now in 40 states. We have touched a total of 43 states. We're going to touch all 50 states at some point. We're working on Hawaii as we speak. So Hawaiian lawyers, if you're out there,
go Hawaii. You've got to touch Hawaii. Yes, please.
But yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. It was kind of finding my own way and then being the guiding light to help other people find their way through this morass of being a business owner and a lawyer simultaneously.
Yeah, well, it is a morass. There's a couple pieces that I really love about your story. One, I love you just being real with us. Like, yeah, I wanted some power and money, right? And the interesting thing about that is I think so many people, when it comes to like talking about purpose in their work, think that, oh, you have to start with some grand purpose. It's kind of what gets sold, right? Follow your purpose. And the thing I loved, actually, it wasn't until after I launched this podcast, Guts, Grit, and Great Business, that I actually read Angela Duckworth's book on grit. And the thing that's so interesting about pretty early in the book, she discloses how you actually don't have to start work based on purpose. Most people end up attaching purpose to something that they're already doing. It doesn't, and I think so many people think like, oh, I must be doing it wrong if I don't feel this really like deep sense of purpose about what I'm doing. And anyways, I just think it's a really powerful reminder that you can choose something and begin the work, and the purpose will follow if you're paying attention. Right?
Yeah, very much so. And I should probably put the little footnote in the story that I have definitely evolved out of the person that I was when I first started. So
well, clearly,
there's no way to practice family law if your only concern is money.
No,
there are so many easier ways to make money.
Well, this was going to be my next point for anybody who doesn't live inside the legal system. There were two things that I was really clear on when I graduated law school, which is that I did not have thick enough skin for criminal law or family law. Those were the two areas where it was like a hell no, right? And so I have really tremendous respect for people that are able to work in those areas and do it in a way that is sustainable, right? And that allows you to be of service, but also not drive yourself into the ground, because that is the piece that I have found with so many attorneys is they really do have a servant's heart. And once they're into the work, they're just like other service providers. They can work themselves into a really non-sustainable position that is also not paying very well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the scary thing about that is so true that, there's a myth in our society that lawyers are money grubbing,
Yes.
evil, hostile, angry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then there are all these social media memes that unfortunately lawyers help to perpetuate. I'm not happy about that.
Right.
It tells the story that we're all miserable, we're all broke.
Mhm.
There's no happiness in this whatsoever. And I'll be honest with you, I was very much in a mixed bag. You know, I am an empath. And so one would ask, how is it possible for you to spend your life around that much trauma? Because I didn't just, family law is its own emotional morass on top of the strain and stress of litigation.
Right.
But, family law that focuses on children, custody, also a different problem. Because
Yeah,
when
it
you're
takes
fighting
takes
for kids,
takes it way to the
there,
top.
there's no replacement part, right? If
Yeah.
little Johnny doesn't go to mom, it's not like we can go out and buy her a new one. And then you add in fighting against the state of New Jersey, right? Because if I lose against the state of New Jersey, someone's never seeing their kid again. They're just not going to see their kid every other weekend. So there was definitely a lot of stress. I took a lot of it personally. I took a lot home with me at night. And it did, at one point in time, it very much ran me into the ground. I became very severely depressed.
Yeah.
I also am a recovering alcoholic. So all of the isms that happen when people don't take care of themselves and make themselves sacrificial lambs, I did that. And then I thought, okay, now I've learned how to master the art of being a really great litigator and managing my emotions, managing my thoughts so that I can be effective and not have it run me over. And then I became a business owner and I rinsed and repeated that same cycle. Right. So now instead of making my clients into my babies that I had to take care of, and it was my fault if I lost,
It was your
I made
business.
my employees into my babies I needed to take care of them and I needed to make sure that they were okay. And I had to unlearn that pattern in order to be effective as a business owner, whether it's in a law firm or in my coaching business, or now in my third business, I also own a real estate company. So, there's never a time when you're going to outrun yourself. You're going to have to deal with your stuff, or your stuff is going to deal with you. And the beautiful thing about the coaching industry, when you have someone who really cares about you and really can help facilitate your evolution, is it shines a light on all that stuff so that when you are moving out into the world, whatever you're creating, it's with intentionality, right? You're not just replicating the same pattern in a new space with a new energy. And that's what I think a lot of people don't recognize about business growth, right? You have to grow yourself to become the leader of the entity you want to have, or else you're just going to be the product of all of your bad habits. It'll just be encapsulated in a business rather than in a relationship or in a friendship or in your own financial ecosystem. And that was probably one of the greatest things I had to learn that made me successful. But that's where I think we are really fundamentally different than a lot of other coaching companies out there, is that we focus on not just giving you the tools to build your business, but to build yourself as you are building your business so that the two are in harmony and you create what you ultimately want in life.
Oh, it's so important, this piece that you talk about really like personal leadership, right? Taking yourself to the next level versus just doing a tactic or strategy in your business or on your business. And I think, the challenge, like truthfully, probably like other areas, but for lawyers in particular, you go to school to learn how to learn and how to analyze and how to do certain things. At least for me, there was not one iota taught about how to be in the business of law.
Correct.
Right?
We're not taught that at all.
No. And so it is a double whammy of having to go out and, not only master the practice of law, but then the business of law on top of it. I'm really curious, and I love hearing, of course you are, anybody that builds a successful business either has to be a systems person or have systems people in their business, right?
Yeah.
At what point have you always been systems oriented? At what point did you recognize like, oh my gosh, I have this skill or this power, I can apply systems to this thing and really grow it?
Well, I mean, I will be candid. I will be very uh, intentional in owning my genius here. That is something that I've always done. I've always instinctually done that, even as a young associate. And I remember the very first time that I was hired into a law firm, like a sizable law firm.
Mhm.
I ended up being in the largest law firm in Monmouth County at the time, and it was a rapid growth law firm, so it almost doubled in size during the 4 years that I was there. So I kind of learned that spirit of growth from my mentor.
Mhm.
But I remember when I came in, the thought was, okay, you are replacing associate A. Associate A went out on maternity leave. She was supposed to come back. She ultimately declined to come back. So now we have a replacement. I said, okay,
And that's
great.
a whole nother right? Oh my
Right.
gosh,
That
you
is
just
its own its own
yeah.
challenge, its own issue. But that person left, and
Mm.
then I was that person's replacement. And then probably a week before I started, they said, oh, by the way, associate B has also given her notice and she's leaving. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay,
Oh, thank
great.
you.
They're like, but don't worry, we're gonna hire someone soon. Well, if you know anything about even a mid-sized law firm, right? As soon as you have two humans in a space, you have politics. So
Right.
now you've got 100 people in a space, you've got a lot of politics. So
Mhm.
it wasn't as simple as we have the work, we can go hire someone. This department says, no, no, it's my turn. You got the
Yep.
last person. And so now I am doing the work qualitatively of two associates. And I remember the partners in the firm were actually, they were very protective of me, and they said, listen, there's a lot of work right now, but we're all going to struggle through until we get to hire. Please let us know if you can't handle it, right? If
Mhm.
there's any volume of work, if we have multitudes of tasks and two or three of us are coming at you at once, we have a system, but sometimes it breaks, let us know. And of course, I was like, I'm never going to tell my bosses I'm not going to be able to get to my work. Like, that's just
Right,
not,
who does that?
who does that, right? So I knew I
Especially
wasn't
if
going to
you're
do
a female, who does that, right?
right. Well, the one thing I will say is I did have the beauty of having three female bosses at the time
Mm,
that I came in. So I did, from watching them, believe them when they said I could say something.
okay.
But I was concerned, right? I'll say something and I'll be judged less favorably. And I think, your job as an associate is to make the partners' lives better. So I wasn't going to say something, but I very quickly had to learn, okay, four people who, I got to understand the people, right? So I got to have a system for recognizing when this person has to have their thing versus when I can push it a little bit. I have to have a system for how much work I can get done over what period of time. So I developed a rhythm. What day am I going to come in? How many things can I get done over a period of time? How can I start block scheduling my time? Like, I was doing all of those things back when I first started. And I remember it never was a challenge for me to meet billable hours, even though the firm where I was, they required 1,960 billable hours a year, which works out to about 161 and some change a month. And people were like, oh my God, when do you sleep? And I'm like, guys, it's not that hard. Like, all you have to do is XYZ. And I remember at some point it occurred to me that I was characterologically different when I
Mhm.
was talking to the managing partner, and he said something. He's like, well, we never worry about you meeting your billable hours. And I said, well, do you worry about anybody else? He was like, well, yeah, like
And for
we're,
anybody that
we're
doesn't
chasing
know,
we're chasing billable hours every month. And I was
yeah.
like, you have to chase people to meet billable
Oh
hours?
yeah.
Like, why is this challenging? All you have to do is do the math, divide by the number of days you're working, blah, blah, blah. And I realized at that point that I was different. And then I started to see and hear other people kind of talking about work and the way that work would stress them out and the challenges that they had with getting their work done. And I never had that challenge, not because work couldn't tax me sometimes, right? We're all human. But I developed a system for everything, which is the reason why I could crank out 60 hours worth of billable work in 40 hours. Now, that sounds like I might be shaving here. I don't want to sound unethical, right? There are definitely ways that you can do that ethically, but it was a process. It was a process for me to learn. And I took that learning into everything that I did, right? So that was how I was able to, bill X number of hours when I went to my next law firm. And then by that time I had a statewide reputation. So I was traveling a lot. Some of that time wasn't compensable. I was speaking a lot. That time wasn't compensable. That was building my brand. That was building my reputation. All of that activity had to be systematized in order for me to make it all fit. And once I became a business owner, it seemed like it would be easy for me to systematize everything in my business. But the challenge was that by the time I left, it's almost like hiring too late, right? I left my law firm, very quickly realized I wasn't going to have the bandwidth I thought I was. My secretary said she was coming with me. And then she ultimately said, you work too hard. I don't want to work as hard as it's going to take for me to have to set up a law firm with you. I've done that before. I just don't want that life. I said, go with God. I love you. And then I had to hire, and then I had to fit hiring into my schedule. So I had to learn all these new skills while I was contemporaneously running a full-fledged practice that frankly needed 2 associates. I mean, I honestly couldn't have gotten through the work that I had on my plate as one human. And I was at that point when I left. So there was no way that I could, when I was out there on my own. And I didn't realize that until it was too late and had that near-death accident. So, it takes a lot to kind of understand yourself. But knowing that that was something that I had a strength for, I was very easily able to digestibly, clearly, concisely explain it to other people. And that was probably the greatest thing, because that made creating Law Firm Mentor just kind of another passing natural activity in life. It wasn't, I didn't have to have a long, hard business plan. I didn't have to have a big talk with God about, is this the right thing for me? It was the natural sequelae of my skills, my experience, and all of the things that I was naturally doing in the practice. I taught lawyers for years how to handle child abuse cases. I taught them trial skill. I taught them evidence. This was the same thing, except I was using my skill as having been a client of coaching to actually facilitate their learning instead of just giving them data and information. And I was doing that in a very systemic way. So that's one of the things that we very much focus on here at Law Firm Mentor. We teach people everything needs a system so that you preserve your energy, you preserve your time, it's replicable to the next person who comes in, and you get a better result that way. You get a better result for yourself, for your team, for your income, for your lifestyle. Everything runs better when it has a system and a systemic approach.
Totally. Well, there's a couple pieces that I'm really curious about. One is I want to hear more about what prompted you, first of all, to go hire your own coach, right? Because I think that's a really pivotal point for a lot of people. And then 2, is there something that in your perspective, especially as you, which I'm sure you do, observe other business models, there's something that makes the legal business model unique or more challenging? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So the first thing, what caused me to hire my own coach was the fact that I almost died.
It was that accident.
So it really was that was a terrifying moment for me, and more so than I think than just I almost had an accident, right? It was the fact that I had gone through a very dark period in my life. I had gotten on the other side of depression. I, at one point in time, had taken psychotropic medications prescribed by a psychiatrist, and I stupidly did the thing that they tell you not to do on the commercials. I said, I don't want to do this whole taking drugs thing anymore. I'm done. And very quickly realized, that whole, if you stop taking these drugs without the advice of a doctor, you'll become suicidal. Well, that's true. So very quickly started realizing, it's almost like I was having a dual existence. And one side of my head, I was like, do harm to myself. And the other side of my head, I was saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you having these thoughts? So I broke through those thoughts. Ultimately, they waned and they went away. But I was still very, very depressed. And I remember when I got through that stage of life and I had a wonderful therapist who helped me,
Mm,
I started to appreciate myself. I started to value my life. And when I would tell the tale about having been that depressed that I actually wanted to end my life, it would cause me to become very emotional.
yeah.
So I finally had gotten to a place where I could look back on that stage of life and be grateful for it and say, going through that made me a more empathetic person.
Mhm.
It made me a better counselor. It made me see my clients with more authenticity.
Yeah.
And now I'm in business and I'm about to lose my life over something as stupid as working like a slave. Why
Yeah.
am I doing that? There's more than enough money in the bank. There are more than enough clients. I'm hemorrhaging clients. Why on earth am I choosing this? And I
Yeah.
couldn't figure out why. And
Mm,
when I had that near death accident, when I almost had that accident, that was kind of the aha of I've got to figure this out or it's going to kill me.
yeah.
And this is a stage in my life where I don't want to die. I want
Right.
to live.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a clear, yeah, you need
Wake
help,
up.
go find help, right?
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the second answer, though, the question that
Mhm.
you asked me about kind of the business model is very interesting because I think a lot of lawyers think special snowflake, right? A professional practice is not the same as a manufacturing plant. It's not the same as a
Mhm.
retail shop. And no, it is not the same, but it is not so different that you should think of it as different than a business. It
Mm.
still has parameters around KPIs. It still has communications processes. It still has marketing and sales and people and systems and finance. It is
Mhm.
still a business. And you need someone who understands how it is different, right? There are
Yeah.
certain things that we are not ethically authorized to do in the marketing of a law firm, the way
Yep.
that you could market a widget factory.
Yep.
There are some things that are different about people in terms of how people are not as fungible in a law firm or any type of professional practice as they might be in a warehouse
Mhm.
or a restaurant, because clients have an absolute right in most jurisdictions to choose counsel of their choosing. And so if a
Yep.
lawyer leaves your law firm, you're not entitled to the clients the way that you'd be entitled to the property of your
Mhm.
business otherwise. So there are nuances, right? And there are
Yep.
things that you have to protect yourself against as being a lawyer who is in business with someone who's going to have access to your clients. There are strategic ways that you can
Mhm.
protect yourself here that you have to think about that are not the same as in other businesses. But it is still a business, right? It still
Mhm.
needs a marketing plan, still needs a business plan, still needs a
Right.
sales process,
All
still
the
needs, right,
components.
all
Yep.
the stuff.
Mm.
And we as lawyers have to recognize that if we don't see it that way, if we don't look at our practice as a business, we're not just missing opportunities to make more money. We are tethering ourselves to something that is a high stress, high deliverable process that is probably never going to be enjoyable to the extent it could be if you were to create a true business, something that runs without you. And it needs to run
Mhm.
without you for the benefit of you, for the benefit of your employees, and for the benefit of your clients.
Mm. Yes, and I think that last point of creating something that runs without you is a particularly challenging piece for lawyers. Before I ask a question about that, I want to go back and visit, first of all, this topic of mental health, even substance abuse, just because I feel like it's so important that we talk about it, both from the standpoint of entrepreneurship, because statistically, entrepreneurs have a higher rate of all the things, right? Depression, mental health issues, et cetera, than the just standard population. Attorneys do too, right? And so it's almost like for those that live in the entrepreneurial and attorney space, it's a bit like a double whammy, but I think it is just it so underscores the importance of why we need to learn in a hurry how to do business the right way that becomes sustainable for us and for our clients, because the impacts are just too great. The alternative is tremendous.
I agree. And the wonderful thing about this is, and I've had this conversation with people before, and they have always been kind of like nail biting, my employment attorney
Mm,
included, right? How can you talk to your team about that? Like, aren't you concerned that they're going to see you as less of a leader? Or aren't you concerned that they're going to have thoughts about, is my job secure? And I tell people, this was I literally hit 10 years in January of this year. And
Congrats.
thank you. Thank you. I threw
Mhm.
myself a party, so
That's
I did
huge. Yes,
celebrate.
we have to celebrate.
Yeah. But I tell people, I was like, it actually makes me better because
Mhm.
when I start to see someone's performance go down, my first thought is not, how can I bill more, get this person to bill more hours, or how can I run this person harder, or what's
Right,
wrong with
squeeze
them?
all the juice out of that lemon.
Right? My
Yeah.
thought is almost always, is there something going on in the life of this human? And if this person is struggling in some way, I can have a humanistic conversation with them and they know they're not going to be judged. I can't tell
Yeah.
you the number of employees that I have helped get into the hands of a counselor. I've
Yeah.
had to deal with substance abuse in my law firm, right? These are human problems. They don't make you less than.
Mm-mm.
And the more you can share that with other professionals, the more you make it okay for them to own when they're not okay, which means they're going to get help faster. The
Yes.
public is going to be helped better because they're
Yes.
going to have someone who's looking out for themselves and making sure they're okay before they're interacting with your file.
Yeah.
And you create a better business that way because in general you want employees to be able to stay, and if they have to run and hide and kind of wear themselves down under the stress of being found out,
Yep.
then you're going to have a revolving door. And I mean, as a legal profession, we already have a higher rate of entrepreneurship, right? Over half of the law firms in existence are solo law firms.
Yeah,
So, we have to keep in mind, we think about the big behemoth firm when we think
we
about
do.
law firms, right? We
Yep.
see it on LA Law, we see it
Right.
on
It's
Ally
what the
McBeal,
public thinks of.
the
Totally.
sexy 50 lawyer law firm. But the reality is, it's mostly one or two lawyers in business together or on their own. And so
Yes.
when you think about that, there is a great benefit to our society of our normalizing the conversation about mental health so that we can be better, not just for ourselves, but for our businesses and the clients that are going to be affected by what we have personally gone through.
That is such, I mean, that like is if people just hear the last 3 minutes of what you said, I think they've gotten like a tremendous value from this conversation. I think, the thing that's so interesting about mental health, about substance abuse is that like we have no problem treating a broken arm, right? Or something that like has this obvious need for treatment and improvement. And yet, you look at those issues where people just tend to isolate and feel tremendous shame, and you're absolutely right, they're less likely to go get support as quickly as they might if we are just more open about the full human experience. And
Yeah.
yesterday, this feels so appropriate, right? Yesterday was World Mental Health Day, and it's like I see, which, again, if you want to talk silver linings of COVID, this whole intense period that people have been through, I think there's a lot more discussion happening about like true impacts to mental health and what people are going through. And it's important that that continue, that not just be a knee-jerk reaction that then goes away,
Right.
right? And so, yeah, I really appreciate you talking openly about that because I agree, it's absolutely critical, and it's critical to quality leadership, no matter the size of the business.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm happy that it came up. I once upon a time I'd have these thoughts in my head of, do I want to share this? How do I want to share this? But now it just kind of,
Mm,
it comes out whenever it comes out.
yeah.
And what's really interesting is when I think about how people receive it. I remember once upon a time I was terrified that a human being could find out that I was one of these defective humans that had
Oh
this problem.
gosh.
And I really, it's odd that I ended up working in child abuse and neglect law because, of course, a lot of my clients do have issues with mental health and
Right.
substance abuse. But I could look at them and I could see them as a whole human being. I could see them as needing help. I never could see that in myself, right? I had a much
That's so,
higher,
yes.
harsher standard for myself. And a lot of lawyers are the same way.
Mhm.
And so I remember when I first started to receive help, I went to the Lawyers Assistance Program. There's one in every state across the union. And I was advised to go to AA meetings. And I resisted and resisted and resisted. And finally I said, okay, fine. I said I would do this. I'll do this. And the very first time I walked into a meeting, it happened to be that a lawyer that I knew, who she's no longer practicing. By that time, she had gone on to a career in healthcare.
Mm.
She was sitting there, and I remember she saw me, and I just, like, my heart dropped, and I was just
Oh,
immobilized with the, what if someone sees, and now this
fear.
person knows, and everyone's going to know, and there were all these feelings. And then I remember I ended up seeing her at like a networking event, probably 2 or 3 months later. And I didn't go back to that particular meeting. By that time, I had called the people at the Lawyers Assistance Program. I was like, I can't do this. Like, this is going to ruin my career. And they're like, well, we have programs specific to lawyers that are just lawyers, at least go to those. So I did that instead. But then I saw this person out, and she came up to me, and of course I'm just like, no, just like, just forget it. And she said to me, she's like, it feels so great to see you here. And I was thinking, well, what does that mean? Does that mean
Right. You're so glad I have.
And she was like, I felt so bad about myself when I started this.
Yeah.
And to know that someone as amazing as you are here, it makes me feel okay. And I was like, it wasn't about me after all. Like, so much of the stuff in our head, like, we think is about us. It's not about us, right?
No.
My favorite book is Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements, right? And it's very much about, like, don't take things personally, because it's not about you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about me. Like, me, in that moment, I got to be a catalyst for her improved self-esteem. And that moment, even though in that stage of my life I wasn't able to receive that, I still think back on that periodically when I talk to my clients, or when I talk to prospects, or even when sometimes I'm on stage and I'll talk to people and it'll come out and I'll say, you know what, someone needed to hear that.
Totally.
It was
Yes. Yes. Well, and this whole experience of talking about our struggles, I feel like, you use the word like humanizes things, or you're able to see even your clients through a more human element. And it's so important that we be able to do that. And I think so long as we're pretending, and not that any of us are trying to pretend to be superhuman, or like we're not subject to, whatever, marital problems, parenting problems, whatever, you name it. The moment that we begin to talk about things, and I learned this really early on in my journey to motherhood. I was one of those that had, 7 years, 7 pregnancies, many miscarriages, lots of things going wrong with my body, where I lost complete confidence in myself, my body, the process, like so many things, our medical system. And talking about it, I realized how many other women went through some element of that, or some piece of it, or could relate. And it just became, I just realized, like, oh, we just need to be talking about it. It's not comfortable, but we need to be doing it, not only for ourselves, but the benefit of others too. So yeah, I 100% agree. I would love to hear back to the piece of, attorneys building a business that will eventually run without them. I think some attorneys can get help with systems. They can figure out, certain things that they do on repeat inside of their business to improve the experience. I think that final piece, though, of removing themselves is a real challenge, right? And I love that you're sitting here now leading not just 2, but now 3 businesses, because clearly you know how to do this. Will you talk to us about, one, why is it so hard for attorneys to do that? Is it about finding somebody that replaces you, that you feel like has the same judgment or the same approach to problem solving? What is it? Or is it really about, this disconnect we have sometimes of really thinking about our practice like a business?
So I think there's so much to that as to why we struggle. I think the biggest reason is that lawyers oftentimes, not universally, but oftentimes our identity is wrapped up in
in the work,
but also in being needed.
yeah,
Right? It's like the dopamine hit comes from, and the people that have the biggest egos are the ones that fare with it the most, right? I am because I matter, and I matter because I lawyer. So therefore I am because I lawyer. So as soon as you stop lawyering, right, because you're reviewing the spreadsheets, you're creating the hiring plan, you're organizing the activity,
doing the leadership,
right?
yeah.
When you're leading instead of lawyering, and your identity is wrapped up in lawyering, you no longer feel a sense of yourself. You feel like I don't matter, or I don't have value. And there's a lot of people that have the story that the only thing that's valuable is the economically compensable, valuable activity. So, for instance,
Mm,
we pay in our society, we pay lawyers a lot more than we pay teachers.
yeah,
And so, if you were to ask someone who is worth more to our economy, a lawyer or a teacher, most people would say a lawyer, right? Because there's more dollars associated with it. Well, where did we get that association from? Right? Depending on what the teacher is, who the teacher is teaching,
mhm,
they are actually, depending on how the lawyer is lawyering, they could very well be responsible for far more economic activity. But we
totally.
see the link to be directly to the dollars paid for the labor. And since
Yeah,
that's our mindset, as soon as a lawyer is no longer deriving their income from their labor in the most direct sense of trading dollars for hours, they oftentimes can't conceptualize their value, right? They got that message
mm,
early on in childhood, they got it from the middle class lifestyle, and it's a hard habit to break. So that's kind of where it starts. But then the next challenge becomes the actual facility of doing the work and no longer doing the legal work. And
yeah.
that is not about who you choose as much as about how you orchestrate the activity. Because you can have what I would refer to as a B list attorney, right? And
Mm,
nobody likes to think of that. Everybody wants to be the A, especially if you're a business owner. You tend to be driven, you tend to be competitive, you want the A for effort, all the stuff. But you can have a B attorney who does
mhm.
A quality work by virtue of your system. And you
Mm,
have to
say that
engineer.
louder for the people in the back.
You can have a B attorney who does A level work as a result of your system.
Mhm,
Yes. And you have to be able to believe that your clients will be just as well served, if not better, by virtue of the
mhm.
B lawyer doing A work through your system than by virtue of you being the sacrificial lamb who's doing work you don't want to do, work you're not eloquated to do, work that you are ultimately not incentivized to do. So once you start to
Mm,
realize that, what you then start to do is you don't try to break the system all at once. You don't take yourself from lawyering 40 hours a week down to lawyering 20 hours a week down to
mhm.
zero, right? What you tend to do is you start to take things off of your plate and put them onto the plates of others. And that requires a monetization of every activity as you do it. So when
Yeah.
you learn that systematizing isn't just finding an efficient way to do work, it's finding an efficient way to make profit off of the work as the work is being done by others. Those elements have to be there. It has to be profitable.
Yeah.
It has to be work that's done at a compensable value, and it has to be work that's done by others. And you put those three components into every piece of your business, and soon you are not needed for your business.
I
Most
bet that's,
often,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I bet it's really challenging for some lawyers to figure out how to make that monetizable, right? How to put that puzzle piece together. I think, especially depending on the way that they structure their billings, the way that they, you know what I mean, assign value to the services that they provide, could take some creativity. Um,
Much less
anyways,
than you might think, actually.
really?
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've actually sat in consultations with lawyers that are like, but I don't have the money to hire, but you're telling me I need to hire in order to work less, but I want to work less, but I can't hire. And I'm like, well, stop the loop for a minute. You know, what are you charging? Okay, great.
Mhm.
I want you to hire a paralegal and I want you to bill them out at $150 an hour. How many hours a week are they going to work? They're going to work 40 hours a week. Okay, great. Let's have them work and bill half of that time. Okay, not all of the time. Let's just start with half the time. Okay, right. So they can start to see a
Mhm.
little bit of a possibility there. And then you walk them down the loop. How many hours and how many dollars at what collection rate, right? That's X dollars.
Mhm.
They're not going to be paid X dollars. They're going to be paid a fraction of X dollars. So before you hire them, you engineer the financial success. And then you start to think, well, how can I do that with other work? I've got some things on my plate that are filing or some things
Mm.
that are marketing, and I'm not going to be billing a client by the hour for that activity. So how do I monetize it? Well, let's assume what the economic cost is to the business of that person. Let's figure out what the profit is we want to make off of that person. How can we make that compensable? Well, that person can save you more time so that you can bill the time to pay, or they can save your paralegal more time so that that person can ultimately produce more because they're doing
Mhm.
less non-billable work. there is always a way to monetize a role. You have to either get it directly through being paid for your time, or you get it indirectly by having someone else be paid for the time that's going to save that activity from the person who would be billing during that time period instead. And once you figure that out, you do that with every single role. Every role has an economic value. There is some quantifiable amount of economic value that the person can produce for a business. And you build it into a system whereby you take into account all the things that come with an employee: time to train them, time to manage them, time to oversee their activity, right? You build that into your model as you go, so that every time you're hiring someone, they're making more profit as you are working less. And that is how you ultimately grow yourself out of being a necessity in your business.
So
So
good.
it doesn't become like breaking the mold, right? Because if I tell most lawyers, I want you to go from billing 80 hours a week to not billing at all, it's so psychologically traumatizing, right? The subconscious mind is like, holy F, what are we doing here?
Alert,
Right? Something's wrong.
Yes.
You don't do that, right? You start to weave away the things that are least profitable so that you have the most responsible, the most qualified, least expensive person doing the work in the business. And you do that over and over again until ultimately you're out of a job.
Yes, I can see where transition wise that makes it much smoother than just making some massive leap. Because the thing I wondered is, you were talking about this topic of like value creation and how as attorneys we get so tied to that as part of our identity, right? The value that we're creating for our clients that we're getting paid directly for. And I also wondered, does it also have to do the struggle with kind of working your way out of a job with giving up the relationship with clients?
It can for some people. I
Yeah.
think it's, when you talk about the relationship, I think it's giving up the role of savior. The number of clients, the number of lawyer clients that we have that very much see themselves as they went into law for some reason, right? And I hate to put it this way, but I tell people all the time, lawyers are damaged people, right? You have to have a certain level of trauma in your life to choose to choose a career where someone's job is to disagree with you, and you're in open hand-to-hand combat where the winner takes all and you're going to be publicly humiliated if you're not the winner. There's a certain sadist that signs up for that.
Well,
right?
when you put it that way.
And we sign up for it, but whether you're transactional or you're a litigator, doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you're signing up for what is a very terse, challenging experience.
Right.
And for a lot of us, as we go through the experience of learning how to lawyer, we arrive on the other side of, okay, I've learned this lawyering thing. Now I have conquered whatever it was that I was trying to conquer by virtue of becoming a lawyer, right? So now I have value in society, whereas I didn't feel valuable before. Now I make money, whereas I wasn't making money before. Now I have a purpose, whereas I didn't feel like I had a purpose before. So for a lot of us, it's very much driven by the idea that I was the underdog and now I fight for the underdog. Or I was the disadvantaged and now I fight for the disadvantaged. And so when you take that away and people don't see the nexus of I am the divine creator who created this ecosystem through which clients get that same amazing result, they don't get that dopamine hit in the same way. Oftentimes it does become the limiting belief that cycles them right back into, nope, it has to be me. I have to be the one. I can't possibly have someone else do this. My clients are not being well served. And they tell that story to themselves because they can't break the psychology of it.
Well, and the interesting thing when you put it that way, and it really makes sense to shift from that like I-centric approach or view to like, what outcome am I creating for the client that can be delivered right by this group of people or my team or whatever? Seems so obvious, right? Seems so obvious. And yet I can see why that is a challenge. Do you think what came to mind when you're talking about lawyers is that many service professionals, and I know that there are folks that listen to this podcast who may not be an attorney, but are a service professional in some other field, I think that could have similar patterns, right? Whether it's the medical field or the therapy field or whatever, being the fixer, because ultimately we're all here to solve some sort of problem for our client, right?
Yeah, it's not a uniquely lawyer problem, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us learned the story growing up that our value comes in how we achieve academically, right?
Mm.
So in your profession, it's not academic achievement anymore, it's career achievement, but it's very
Mhm.
much about chasing the rainbow of the attaboys and the attagirls.
The
And if
accolades,
right. And you
yes.
start getting that over and over again. I matter because I got the award. I matter because people praise me. I matter because people see me as successful. And then you put yourself into another realm, you oftentimes will have a sense of loss. In fact,
Mm.
I remember when I stopped taking litigation cases, people would call the office all the time. And by this time, I had a statewide reputation, I had a very big name in what
Mm.
I do. And so when people would call the office, and I would, I personally wasn't answering the phone, but a staff member, team member would say, okay, so the way that we work is you're going to meet with our director of client services, and then she's going to determine the right one for your matter.
Mm-hmm.
The person would
Mm-hmm.
say, well, I was referred to Allison. Like, I
Right.
want her as my attorney. And at some point, my team was coming to me and saying, well, they really want you. Do you think you could take this one? Or, she's really insistent or whatever. And I said, no, don't come to me with this person wants, or this person has a really sexy case, or this person was referred by
Mm-hmm.
this senator, or this person is dating this athlete, or this person is X dollars, or I don't care. Like, I had to like throw up the wall and say
Yeah.
it's a non-negotiable. And that was really hard because from an ego perspective, my ego was still being fed by they need me, they need me, they need me, I matter.
Yes.
And when I stopped energizing it, like it takes a lot of probably deeper thought work than most of us can get into, even in the span of this conversation. But when I stopped the patterning and the energizing of I must be needed, I noticed those calls stopped. We
Ah,
didn't change anything in the marketing,
right.
right? We didn't change anything in how we packaged the story. The story was still the same. You call
Mhm.
the office, you speak with our director of client
You go through
services,
the
you
system.
go through our system,
Mhm.
and she will determine who is the right team member to work with you, the right
Mm.
composite team of lawyer, paralegal, and administrative assistant. And that is the process. But it stopped showing up when I stopped putting out the energy
Yep.
of I need to be needed.
Yep.
And once I realized the power of directing my thoughts toward the outcome that I wanted, which is my clients are better served by working with someone else. My clients are best
Mm.
served by having me as the architect of their legal matter by virtue of the
Yep.
systems that I created.
Yep.
And then they have a general contractor who is their leading attorney. And then they have a subcontractor who is the associate on the file. And then they have a series of professionals helping to build out the infrastructure who are the paralegals and the
Mm.
administrative team and so forth. Once I realized that, I was still at cause, right? I still
Yeah.
created the system, but I was no longer being selfish and saying my ego needs to be needed, and therefore I will take myself in exhaustion to serve this
Yeah.
person in a way I don't want to, so that I can have that dopamine hit, even if they would be better served by someone else.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a key point. And I just love really personally the challenge, thinking of it from a challenge perspective of taking the creativity, the problem solving skills that we have as attorneys, shifting that into how do you create a model that consistently creates this positive outcome, right? Rather than this
Right.
focus
Then you
on
get to
self.
help more people that way.
Yeah, exactly. And you've created a model that you know works and can repeat and provide consistent client experiences, which is ultimately what I think many of us want, right? So love that. Love, love, love it. I want to be respectful of your time. I realize we've run you up right to the top of the hour. Allison, I've loved this conversation and everything that you've shared with us. I think that there's so much that service professionals can get from this, that entrepreneurs can get from this. It's, really, really heavy overlaps in those worlds. For folks that want to connect with you and learn more about your work, about your coaching, where do you send them?
Well, I tell people all things Law Firm Mentor can be found on our website, which is lawfirmmentor.net.
Mhm.
And I also have a podcast, the Crushing Chaos with Law Firm Mentor podcast. And on the podcast, we feature guests, but it really is primarily me. And you hear how we coach people, you hear
Mhm.
what some of the tenets of success are, and how we ultimately will help a law firm owner who owns a solo shop or even a small partnership to get to that next level without all the pain and agita that I had to experience getting there.
Yeah, I love it. Crushing Chaos. Be sure to pop over and check that out. Allison, we will share all your links, including to both your websites and your podcast on our show notes page. Those can be found at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Allison, any final thoughts you'd like to leave listeners with today?
We have gone in so many different directions that I wasn't expecting. I would just say, there was a lot that came out in this episode. I think that Heather, you do such an excellent job of like pulling out of people kind of the story that I think a lot of people need to
Mm.
hear. So I hope that people got value out of this conversation. I'm sure that there'll still be things that I don't even remember saying that I will hear when I listen again. But to the extent that anybody has any thoughts about how to be well in the business of being an entrepreneur, some of the things we talked about with mental health and sobriety, I think are really important to
Yeah.
pay heed to.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you for being so open with us. I have loved this conversation. I look forward to being in touch, and we will wrap up here shortly, but then stay on because you and I've got some connections for you. So thanks again to our listeners for being with us today. Huge thank you to Allison Williams. Really good to have you here.
Thanks again.